Rise and Fall of the Titans 4. This is a story of ambition and intellect, of vision and hubris, of a dream built on brilliance that collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. It is the story of a man who rose from the dusty classrooms of a provincial university to command one of Nigeria's largest financial institutions, and who fell, spectacularly and publicly, in one of the most dramatic corporate collapses in African history. But it is also more than that. This is a chronicle of an era, the wild, intoxicating years of Nigeria's banking revolution, when petrodollars flowed like water, when regulatory constraints were viewed as challenges to be creatively circumvented, and when the line between audacious entrepreneurship and reckless gambling became so blurred that even the smartest minds could no longer see it. It was a time when a lecturer from a small town in Ondo State could conjure a banking colossus from little more than force of personality and financial wizardry, and when that same colossus could be reduced to rubble by global forces and internal rot in the span of a few brutal months. At the heart of this narrative is a singular transformative event, the 2005 merger between Meridian International Bank and Allied Commercial Bank. On the surface, it was a triumph, a strategic masterstroke that thrust Meridian into the top tier of Nigerian finance and crowned Ayo Fashina as the visionary architect of a national champion. The financial press celebrated it, the stock market rewarded it, the regulators approved it. It was presented to the world as a merger of equals, a synergistic union that would reshape the competitive landscape. But beneath the champagne toasts and the soaring share prices, the merger was planting the seeds of destruction. It injected hidden toxins, non-performing loans, cultural fractures, and dangerous operational complexities deep into Meridian's bloodstream. It inflated Ayo's already considerable ego to levels where dissent became impossible and prudence became a relic. It created an institution so large, so systemically important, that when it failed, it would threaten the entire Nigerian financial system and guarantee a regulatory response of unprecedented fury. The 2005 merger was both Ayo Fashina's crowning achievement and his fatal mistake. It was the pivot point where ambition crossed into hubris, where calculated risk became reckless exposure, and where a visionary's dream began its inexorable descent into nightmare. This is not a simple tale of villainy. Ayo was neither a cartoon fraudster nor a helpless victim of circumstance. He was a complex, brilliant, deeply flawed man, a product of Nigeria's paradoxes, capable of genuine idealism and ruthless manipulation in equal measure. The story that follows is populated by whistleblowers with mixed motives, lieutenants torn between loyalty and survival, rival banks that weaponize the crisis for competitive advantage, and regulators forced to choose between forbearance and the nuclear option. What unfolds in these pages is a financial thriller, a corporate tragedy, and a national parable. It is the story of how Meridian International Bank and the man who built it rose to dizzying heights on wings of genius and fell to earth on the weight of secrets that could no longer be hidden. It is about the intoxicating dream of building something monumental in a nation hungry for symbols of its own capability, and about the brutal reckoning when reality, patient and relentless, finally comes to collect its debt. The rain continued to fall on Lagos that August day in 2009. By evening, the Central Bank of Nigeria would issue a statement that would reverberate across the continent. The oracle's prophecy, it turned out, had been fatally, catastrophically wrong. Ayo was not a son of privilege. Hailing from a small town in Ondo State, his sharp intellect had been his passport, carrying him through the halls of academia. He understood money not just as currency, but as a psychological force, a tool for societal transformation. As he lectured on monetary theory, his mind was already dissecting the frailties of Nigeria's nascent banking sector. The cronyism, the lethargy, the sheer lack of imaginative fire. He saw a gaping void between the conservative colonial-era institutions and the frenetic entrepreneurial energy of the Nigerian street. Someone, he believed, could build a bridge between them. Someone with nerve, intellect, and an unshakable vision. The vision crystallized not as an instant lightning strike, but gradually, in conversations across years with shopkeepers in the markets of Alaba and Espanda, in late-night debates with fellow lecturers, And in the lonely hours, he spent writing policy papers that were too radical for the journals of the day. He believed in a bank that would serve traders and new entrepreneurs with speed and respect. He believed that if trust could be delivered quickly, credit would follow, and the economy would hum with renewed life. That idea found its first concrete form in the mid-1980s. As the structural adjustment winds blew through the economy, stripping protections and demanding a new breed of financial warrior, Ayo felt urgency. The era of the ankle kickers was dawning. Aggressive, savvy bankers who would chase deposits and market share with a ferocity that made the old guard blanch. He did not just want to run a bank, he wanted to create a new banking culture. In 1989, with a consortium of investors who were captivated by his piercing gaze and eloquent, persuasive blueprints, Meridian International Bank was born. Not the first new generation bank, Meridian sought to be the audacious one. The inaugural office was not on Marina, but the bank's presence was immediately felt wherever traders gathered in the city. Ayo's strategy was a masterclass in aggressive growth. He hired young, hungry graduates, instilling in them a cult-like zeal for the Meridian way. He targeted the underserved market of small and medium-scale traders, the Alaba market millionaires who were treated with disdain by the older banks. Meridian offered them speed, respect, and innovative products. Quick turnaround trade finance, small equipment loans with flexible collateral arrangements, and unusually hands-on customer service. Yo was mesmerizing. In boardrooms, his voice was a calm, steady instrument, weaving complex financial concepts into compelling narratives of wealth and national destiny. In branches, he would appear unannounced, asking a teller about their targets, congratulating a marketer on a closed deal. He spoke of banking the unbanked with the fervor of a missionary. His staff revered him, not just as a boss, but as the oracle, the man who saw tomorrow's profits where others saw only risk. The 1990s were a rocket ride. Meridian expanded its branch network at a breakneck pace, its cobalt and gold logo becoming a symbol of aggressive modernity across the Southwest and beyond. EO pioneered the use of technology, investing heavily in early computing systems to streamline operations, considered extravagant by rivals. He courted corporate clients with a mix of sharp pricing and force of personality. The bank's assets swelled. Profit before tax soared. He became a fixture in the financial press, his quotes laden with confidence and foresight. He was not just building a bank, he was building a monument to his own intellect and ambition. His personal ascent mirrored Meridian's. The modest lecturer was transformed into a titan of industry. He built a formidable mansion in Ikoya. He collected abstract art, advised committees within government, and his philanthropic arm, the Fashina Initiative, dispersed funds to universities and hospitals. He cultivated an aura of invincibility. In a sector known for volatility, EO and Meridian seemed to possess a magic touch, consistently posting impressive numbers even when economic indicators faltered. Beneath the glittering surface, however, the first tremors of future catastrophe were being felt. To maintain its meteoric growth, Meridian began to sail close to the wind. Regulatory limits on lending to single entities were not so much breached as artfully navigated through a labyrinth of special-purpose vehicles. Huge loans were extended to powerful individuals and conglomerates. Loans often secured more on relationship and promise than on tangible collateral. The share price was everything, and everything was directed towards propping it up. Ayo, the master strategist, began to operate in a realm where the line between aggressive banking and a perilous house of cards was increasingly blurred. He rationalized it as the necessary daring of a pioneer. The ends, he believed, would justify the means. By the turn of the millennium, Meridian was a top 10 bank, respected and profitable, but Ayo was restless again. The landscape was crowded with other ambitious new generation banks, Oceanfront Bank, Eastern Trust, Alliance Republic, all vying for supremacy. Then news that would reshape the industry reached him. The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, announced a landmark policy, a dramatic increase in the minimum capital base for banks, from a level that many had grown comfortable with to a threshold that few could reach alone. The CBN's aim was consolidation. Fewer banks, but stronger, systemic players capable of financing infrastructure. For most bankers, this was a period of anxiety. For Ayo, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. He didn't just see a regulatory hurdle, he saw a historic chance to leapfrog the competition and transform Meridian into a national champion. Size, he concluded, was now the ultimate security and the ultimate weapon. Ayo's eye fell on Allied Commercial Bank, ACB. ACB was a sizable established bank with a strong presence where Meridian's footprint was lighter. It had history and a solid deposit base, but lacked Meridian's dynamism. Crucially, it was perceived as vulnerable in the face of the new capital requirements. The merger negotiations began as a public dance of logos and promises, merger of equals, synergy, nation building. But in private, they were a fierce contest of valuations and boardroom seats. Ayo moved with a blend of charm and ruthlessness. He courted major shareholders and directors of ACB, painting a picture of a merged entity, a behemoth with national reach, a new strategy to conquer retail and corporate markets alike. On July 29, 2005, Meridian International and Allied Commercial surprised the financial world by announcing an agreement to merge. Meridian would retain its name, and the combined entity would leap into the top 5 banks by balance sheet size. The public and markets erupted in applause. Internally, however, the integration was messy. The Meridian way was imposed on the former ACB staff, who reacted to the brash, target-driven culture with resentment. Redundancies were handled poorly. More dangerously, in the rush to meet the CBN deadlines, not every skeleton in ACB's closet was revealed. ACB's loan book carried non-performing assets across industries, oil services in the Niger Delta, distressed manufacturing concerns, and politically exposed projects that were fragile. Some of these were creatively presented as recoverable and collateralized when they were not. Keen to claim the prize of size, Ayo's team may have turned a willful blind eye to ticking time bombs. The merger injected scale and a hidden toxin into Meridian's bloodstream. Ayo stood on the balcony of the expanded Meridian House and felt he had fulfilled his destiny. The 2005 merger wasn't merely a corporate transaction, it was the concretization of his prophecy. But in his triumph, the oracle became more imperious. He wanted to centralize power so decisions could be made at speed. Major lending decisions began to bear his signature. The risk team's warnings increasingly met the gentle, persuasive force of his certainty. Between late 2005 and 2007, Meridian's ascent reached a dizzying peak. The bank became a symbol of the audacious new Nigeria. Its blue and gold logo was ubiquitous. Financial results shone, assets ballooned, profits rose. Meridian became a kingpin in the capital markets, deeply involved in margin lending and proprietary trading. Its treasury was a marvel of sophistication: cross-currency swaps, repurchase agreements, and complex structured notes. Simultaneously, Meridian plunged into financing the oil boom, crude lifting contracts, aviation fuel financing, upstream exploration. These deals were huge and profitable on paper. Meridian's success consolidated Ayo's influence. He was regularly called to government economic forums, gave grand speeches about developmental banking, and announced plans for a futuristic Meridian Tower, a gleaming corporate city meant to be the tallest building in West Africa. Philanthropy flowed from the Fashina initiative. His public image was that of a successful entrepreneur building a nation. But privately, the bank's machinery groaned. To smooth over the rough edges, the financial engineering grew more elaborate. Non-performing loans inherited from ACB began to surface. Rather than provisioning, many were restructured, extended, recollateralized with assets of doubtful quality, or moved into special-purpose vehicles off the main balance sheet. New loans to shaky conglomerates were sometimes granted with tacit understanding that a portion would be used to service older debts, a Ponzi-like tactic. Meridian's treasury became a hall of mirrors, a place where liquidity and profits could be conjured, at least on paper. A small, tight inner circle knew the truth. The bank's apparent health was fragile. They were bound to Ayo by wealth, loyalty, and a shared belief in the dream. They were also bound by fear, the fear that the first real shock would reveal their private accounting as illusion. The 2005 merger had given Meridian gigantic scale. If it failed, the fall would be monumental. When the global financial crisis struck in 2007 to 2008, the tremors reverberated across continents to Lagos and its banks. The collapse of major financial houses abroad dried up liquidity and triggered a violent flight from risky assets. In Nigeria, the stock market collapsed. For Meridian, the immediate danger was its vast margin lending book. As share prices plunged, collateral evaporated, borrowers were underwater, and defaults accelerated. The bank faced margin calls it could not meet and found itself holding securities with drastically reduced values. At the same time, oil prices crashed, stressing Meridian's oil and gas portfolio. The hidden bad loans from the 2005 merger began to bleed. Ayo responded publicly with calm. He blamed global contagion and spoke of Meridian's strong fundamentals. He announced strategic asset sales and cutbacks, but the inner reality was different. Nightly crisis meetings became routine. Ayo pressured debtors to repay, engaged in intense negotiations, and authorized loan restructurings that stretched their statutory meaning. Loans were evergreened with new credit to pay old interest. The management team scrambled to secure emergency capital. At the worst point, Meridian announced a massive rights issue to shore up its capital base and placed hopes on a buoyant reaction. Simultaneously, allegations began to surface, first whispers, then louder accusations, that Meridian's management had used bank funds to prop up the share price. Rumors spoke of convoluted transactions through related entities, Greenpoint Capital, Argosy Securities, and Sunridge Investments. These entities, tied indirectly to key Meridian insiders, had allegedly purchased Meridian shares to create a perception of demand. If true, it would be a grave violation of law. In late 2008 and 2009, the CBN underwent a leadership change. The new governor was a stern man with a background in risk management. He had little patience for narrative and demanded numbers. Under his leadership, the CBN and the Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation, NDIC, launched a forensic examination of the banking industry. Meridian was one of 5 banks they singled out as dangerous. The discovery of Meridian's troubles led to a media and political storm. Front-page headlines questioned where the money had gone. Whistleblowers, some fostered by internal discontent from the ACB legacy teams, shared documents revealing irregular transactions. The press turned Ayo from oracle to suspect overnight. On a sweltering Friday in August 2009, the CBN released a statement. The managing directors and executive directors of 5 banks were being removed. Meridian International Bank was at the top of the list. Ayo was suspended. The CBN cited gross misconduct, pervasive insider-related abuses, and staggering levels of non-performing loans which posed a systemic threat. The impact was immediate. Trading suspended. Depositors panicked. Meridian's corporate accounts froze. Ayo declared the move illegal and politically motivated. He vowed to fight. The Economic Crimes Commission moved quickly, freezing assets and filing charges alleging impropriety and reckless lending. The bank was placed under a bridge arrangement and new management installed. For Ayo, the fall was cataclysmic. His Ikoyi mansion was searched, his art collection seized. Former allies turned away. He fled the country, heading to London, where he purchased a small flat and mounted a legal and public relations defense. He claimed persecution, argued that the CBN had overreached, and insisted the crisis was the product of global contagion. In London, he filed suits in multiple jurisdictions, challenging the CBN's actions. If the public story was straightforward, ambition turned to hubris, there was a darker, more complex tale beneath the surface. Over the next months, as forensic teams opened Meridian's records, a web of intrigue was revealed, and with it, several unexpected twists. A junior auditor on the CBN team, Ibrahim Aid, found a ledger hidden in a pile of discarded server backups. It was not labeled as Meridian's main ledger, but bore entries that seemed to show repayments on several large, allegedly non-performing loans. The dates showed settlements had been recorded in the weeks following the merger. But the funds backing those repayments came from obscure transactions from a company called Redcliffe Holdings. Redcliffe, it turned out, had been established shortly before the merger by former ACB executives. At first glance, Redcliffe seemed like a conduit for repayments. But further scrutiny revealed a pattern. The money Redcliffe used to repay loans had, months earlier, originated from a complex intra-bank swap with Meridian's own treasury. Essentially, Meridian had shuttle transferred funds from one account to another, dressing it up as third-party repayments. The ledger was both exculpatory and damning. It suggested that some loans had been brought current on paper through circular transfers rather than actual repayments. This discovery led to questions not just about greed, but about desperation. Who had engineered the circuit? Was it a senior Meridian treasurer desperately trying to prevent a default as the market collapsed, or a deliberate act of obfuscation to hide deeper theft? The audit team labeled it artful manipulation. The narrative that Meridian had been both negligent and willfully deceptive gained traction. Ayo's inner circle was small: a CFO who had grown up with him in school, a charismatic head of corporate banking named Chidera Nwosu, and a brilliant but paranoid head of treasury, Henry Okoro. Publicly, they were united. Privately, tension simmered. The CFO, whose career had been built beside Ayo's, had quietly made arrangements, mortgaging his own family holdings to keep Meridian's share price steady when the market wobbled in 2007. He had also cultivated relationships with an international fund, Blackbridge Capital, which later turned out to have significant short positions against Meridian. Late-night interviews with captured shell companies and phone records revealed a troubling pattern. The CFO had been communicating frequently with an unknown intermediary tied to Blackbridge. At times, he had advocated aggressive share support measures. At others, he had provided the fund with insight into Meridian's private liquidity arrangements. These traces raised the possibility that an insider had been playing both sides, feeding market players with selective information that would enable them to profit from the bank's volatility. When interrogated by authorities, the CFO collapsed, claiming he had been coerced by Blackbridge into sharing information after they threatened to expose certain family transactions. He said he had believed Ayo could manipulate the market back in their favor, and that he had been trying to buy time. Whether he was a villain or a frightened pawn became a subject of impassioned debate. Ayo, enraged, accused his former lieutenant of betrayal. The media loved the drama. Close friends torn apart by the pressure of unprecedented crisis. As Meridian's problems metastasized, a parallel investigation into other banks showed that competition in the sector had grown brutal. A consortium of rival banks had quietly agreed, in the fevered months of early 2008, to pursue an aggressive strategy: acquire failing smaller players and, failing that, short exposed competitors to force consolidations favorable to the consortium's members. The scheme was crude: disseminate damaging rumors, coordinate sell-side research, and where possible, make private offers to buy assets cheaply once share prices collapsed. A confidential memo leaked from a mid-level manager at one of the rival banks, Oceanfront Trust, suggested their strategy included identifying weak brothers and testing market faith by spreading stories meant to unsettle investors. There was no direct proof that Oceanfront had conspired to bring down Meridian, but correlations emerged: the timing of targeted sell reports, the coincident appearance of aggressive short positions from funds like Blackbridge, and the sudden withdrawal of interbank credit from Meridian all aligned in ways that suggested this was not mere coincidence. Buried in the Fashina initiative's financials, investigators found a pattern of loans that looked suspect until they dug deeper. Ayo had long wanted to fund an agricultural and technical college in his hometown. He had believed that the nation needed a different model for vocational training, one that combined entrepreneurship with practical skills. He had authorized loans and grants to a network of cooperatives and local contractors to build the first campus. But as the crisis worsened and cash became scarce, the funds intended for the college were redirected, by intermediaries, to service other liabilities within Meridian's ecosystem. Interviews with former Meridian branch managers in Ondo revealed that several loans to cooperatives had been recorded as non-performing on the bank's books even though the borrowers had been making payments. Locals swore the project had been materially underway: walls up, workshops built, teachers hired. What had gone wrong was not simply theft, but a chaotic misallocation in a bank with overstretched priorities. Loans intended for community development were siphoned to pay interest elsewhere. The contrast between Ayo's public investment in education and the eventual misuse of funds complicated the moral portrait. He had been sincere about the college. His bank's internal disorder had perverted the intention. Whistleblowers played a vital role in Meridian's downfall, some out of conscience, some out of revenge. One in particular, an IT analyst named Funmi Adebayo, no relation to Ayo, surfaced with her own complex motives. Funmi had been hired during the merger and felt marginalized by Meridian's new culture. She leaked emails and payment schedules that suggested certain payments to politically connected contractors were poorly documented. But in a private conversation with a journalist, Funmi revealed she had originally been approached by a private investigator working for Ayo. Years earlier, disillusioned by certain behaviors inside Meridian, Ayo had allegedly engaged an investigator to root out a group of insiders who were suspected of siphoning funds. The investigator told Ayo he had uncovered records of tampering but warned him the operation could backfire if made public. The investigator recommended quiet negotiations. Ayo, exhausted and focused on keeping the bank afloat, deferred. Funmi's leak had not been mere moral outrage. She had been nursing a grievance about a promotion she believed she deserved and an ethnic dismissal she felt when the new management team consolidated power. Her leaks fed the CBN's appetite for a dramatic cleanup. But Funmi's confession, revealing she had initially been an instrument of internal surveillance, showed how tangled motives were. Many whistleblowers were not purely altruistic. Their disclosures were the catalyst for regulatory action, but they came with personal baggage. The public melodrama intensified. Ayo's lawyers argued that the CBN's intervention had been overzealous and procedurally flawed. The CBN pointed to mountains of data, anemic capital ratios, a treasury whose mismatched maturities left it illiquid, and loan books with too many related party deals. Fund managers who had lost money demanded accountability. Politicians seized the topic for headlines. In London, Ayo tried to keep his defense simple. He had been a visionary who misread a global storm, not a criminal. He published op-eds, gave interviews, and filed lawsuits. He claimed that the CBN's report conflated systemic industry failure with individual malfeasance. He called for an independent inquiry and insisted that some of the documents against him were misinterpreted by auditors who did not grasp the bank's internal context. But the CBN and the courts had other ideas. The charges of reckless lending and insider abuse were broad and damning. A particularly explosive allegation was that Meridian had funneled funds to a group of shell companies to support its own share price, creating an engineered demand. If true, that would be market manipulation of the highest order. As Meridian's case made international headlines, bankers across Nigeria grew careful. Depositors fled from some institutions, other banks tightened lending. The crisis rippled into the broader economy, slowing growth and trimming foreign investor appetite. The CBN's forensic teams discovered that in the immediate aftermath of the merger, a contingent of ACB executives had negotiated a secret deal with a shadow investor, an entity based in Mauritius called Marlowe Partners. The deal was simple. Marlowe would provide short-term liquidity in the form of structured credit facilities in exchange for favorable terms, heavy fees, and future payoffs in the event Meridian was forced to sell assets. The documentation of the deal was deliberately opaque. It allowed ACB managers to mask liquidity shortfalls during the merger period. After nearly 6 years in exile, Ayo returned quietly to Nigeria. He had been negotiating with lawyers for a fragile arrangement. His return was both a personal and political gamble. He wanted to face the courts and clear the air, to reclaim his reputation if possible. He arrived at dawn, a leaner man, flanked by legal teams. The welcome was icy. During his arraignment, he looked older, the edges of his face softened by years away. He was granted bail, and the trial began a slow, punctuated crawl through courtrooms dominated by procedural hearings. The courtroom drama did not deliver the expected cinematic payoff. As months turned into years, it became clear that such cases in Nigeria, complex with cross-border elements and requiring mountains of documentation, could not be resolved quickly. Witnesses fell ill, records were incomplete, and the legal system creaked under the weight of high-profile litigation. In an unexpected development, the former Meridian CFO, sensing that the CBN and the prosecution were closing in, approached Ayo's defense team with a confession, but not one that fit the public narrative. He admitted to misstatements and to aggressive internal accounting, but he also named a second-level group, a cabal of non-executive directors and senior chairs at rival banks who had coordinated information leaks and market pressure in coordinated ways. The CFO offered to testify in exchange for immunity and protection for his family. The confession was explosive. If true, it would reveal a coordinated campaign to destabilize Meridian, implicating rivals and perhaps exonerating Ayo of the worst allegations. But the confession posed legal risks. If the CFO lied under oath, the entire case could collapse. The prosecution weighed its options. Eventually, a deal was struck. The CFO would testify, but his evidence would be corroborated by bank records and external trading logs. The CBN and the prosecuting team began a separate investigation into market manipulation orchestrated outside Meridian. The case broadened from an account of a single failed bank to an indictment of an era's brutal financial politics. Over the next several years, the legal picture fractured into many tributaries. Some senior Meridian executives accepted plea bargains for negligent practices and agreed to disgorge sums. Others were found to have colluded with external funds and faced criminal sanctions abroad. The CBN faced criticism for both overreach and for failing to prevent the excesses of the era. There was no singular villain. The crisis had been systemic, spread across personalities, institutions, regulatory gaps, and global forces. Ayo's personal legal outcome was mixed. He faced charges of negligence and reckless lending and was found civilly liable for failures of governance. Criminal convictions did not materialize on the most serious counts amid the tangled evidence and procedural missteps, but the courts found that he had presided over a culture of imprudent risk-taking. Financial penalties and restitution were ordered. He paid from frozen assets and insurance settlements. The final legal picture was a palimpsest of wins and losses, of partial exonerations and partial culpabilities. Redemption in the public eye was a different matter. The myth of the oracle had been dismantled, yet in quieter circles a more nuanced portrait emerged. Those who had worked under Ayo in the early days remembered his fierce idealism and the small loans that funded small businesses who had grown into thriving firms. In his hometown, the aborted college project left an imprint, a campus half-built that had been converted into a community center after local leaders negotiated to use the facilities. The Fashina initiative continued on a smaller scale, run by trustees who had once been his protégés. For Meridian Bank, CBN took steps to save depositors' funds. This was done by preparing grounds for the bank to be acquired by another bank. The bank that did that was HarborOne Bank plc. To understand why HarborOne Bank would even dare to look at such a crippled giant, one must understand the bank and the men who led it. In the early 2000s, HarborOne Bank was a middling merchant banking-focused institution. This changed in 2002 with the arrival of a new leadership duo, Ihima Nosa as president/CEO and Donald Wagbera as deputy managing director. They were young, brilliant, and fiercely strategic. Their vision, captured in their 2002 transformation agenda, was to build the world's most respected African bank. They understood that organic growth would not get them there fast enough in the brutally competitive Nigerian landscape. Nosa, a lawyer and financier, was the master strategist and dealmaker. Calm, calculating, and possessing a penetrating intellect, he could dissect a balance sheet and see 3 moves ahead in the regulatory chess game. Wagbara, an accountant with a formidable grasp of risk and operations, was the executor, the man who could build systems and ensure the engine ran smoothly. Together, they were a perfect partnership. They had already begun executing a consolidation strategy. They acquired Cowrie Bank in 2005 and Broadway International Bank in 2007. These were small, manageable acquisitions that served as crucial training exercises in merger integration. They developed a proprietary merger integration framework, a playbook for combining people, processes, and technology. By 2009, HarborOne Bank was a strong, well-capitalized, and conservatively managed Tier 2 bank. It had weathered the financial storm not by luck, but by prudence. While others lent wildly, HarborOne had built a robust risk management culture. Its capital base was solid. When the CBN announced the distress list, Nosa and Wagbara didn't see just a crisis. They saw the opportunity. Meridian, despite its poisoned balance sheet, possessed what HarborOne desperately lacked and could not build quickly: immense scale. Its vast retail network, its brand recognition in the grassroots, its millions of customer accounts, and its sizable deposit base were priceless assets. Acquiring it would be a transformational transaction, a phrase Nosa would use repeatedly. It would catapult HarborOne from a respected player to a dominant one overnight. The gamble was immense, but the potential reward was a permanent seat at the top table of African finance. The immediate challenge was how to structure the acquisition. Meridian wasn't a simple company with debts, it was a radioactive entity. Its bad loans were so deep and tangled that no sane bank would touch it. Direct acquisition would have poisoned HarborOne's own healthy balance sheet instantly. The CBN and NDIC, under the leadership of Sanusi and NDIC's Ganiyu Ogunlai, devised an ingenious solution: the bridge bank mechanism. This was a novel approach in Nigeria. The process involved: 1. The good bank split. The viable parts of Meridian Bank, its branches, staff, customer deposits, and performing assets, were transferred to a new clean entity named Meridian Bank plc in Bridge. This bridge bank was healthy and operational. 2. The bad bank solution. The toxic assets, the non-performing loans mostly to oil magnates and stock market speculators, were carved out and transferred to the newly formed Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON. AMCON, a government-backed bad bank, would use public funds to slowly recover these loans over decades, taking the poison out of the banking system. 3. The sale. The bridge bank, now an attractive, cleansed entity with a giant network but a clean slate, was put up for sale. The NDIC, as the holder of 100% of its shares, invited bids. This structure was a masterstroke. It protected depositors entirely. Not a single depositor lost a kobo, isolated systemic risk, and created a marketable asset. The message to bidders was: you are buying the franchise, the network, and the customers, without the lethal baggage. The announcement triggered a high-stakes auction. The list of potential suitors was a who's who of Nigerian and African finance. Stanbic IBTC, the local affiliate of Standard Bank of South Africa, Africa's largest bank by assets, was a formidable contender with deep pockets. There were also strong domestic conglomerates and private equity consortia, all lured by the scale of the prize. The HarborOne Bank war room went into overdrive. The bid preparation was not just about submitting the highest number. It was about presenting the most credible, holistic plan for stability and integration. Nosa and his team knew the regulator's paramount concern was financial system stability. A failed integration could trigger a collapse of confidence, leading to a run on not just the merged entity, but potentially other banks. HarborOne Bank's proposal, therefore, focused on: 1. Financial engineering. They presented a solid plan for raising the capital needed to support the enlarged entity, combining their own strong capital with potential fresh investment. 2. The integration playbook. They showcased their proven merger integration framework, demonstrating a clear step-by-step plan for combining the two institutions without disrupting customer service. 3. Management depth. They highlighted the strength and experience of their leadership team, contrasting it with the governance failures that had doomed Meridian. 4. Strategic vision. They articulated a compelling story of the future: a merged bank that would be a Nigerian champion, stable, customer-focused, and a catalyst for economic growth. It was a battle of nerves. Rumors swirled in the financial press. Lobbying was intense. The NDIC and CBN evaluation teams conducted grueling due diligence sessions, grilling each bidder on the minutiae of their plans. For months, the process hung in the balance. Finally, in February 2011, the news broke. The NDIC and CBN announced that HarborOne Bank plc had emerged as the preferred bidder for 100% of Meridian Bank plc in Bridge. The financial terms were a combination of cash and shares, valuing the transaction in the hundreds of billions of naira. HarborOne Bank had won. The analysis was unanimous. While the financial offer was competitive, it was the credibility of the integration plan and the strength of management that tipped the scales. The regulators had chosen the team they believed could not just buy the bank, but successfully heal it. Winning the bid was the end of the beginning. Now began the Herculean task, Project New Era, the internal code name for the integration. This was arguably the largest, most complex corporate merger in Nigerian history. Donald Wagbara, who would soon take over as Group Managing Director, was now in his element as the chief architect of the integration. The challenges were multifold and monumental. 1. Cultural integration, clash of titans. This was the most profound challenge. HarborOne Bank's culture was formal, process-oriented, technology-driven, and conservative. Meridian's culture, forged in an era of aggressive growth, was entrepreneurial, relationship-based, and less structured. Many ex-Meridian staff saw HarborOne personnel as rigid bureaucrats. HarborOne staff viewed the Meridian team as undisciplined. Managing this human friction required sensitive but firm leadership, clear communication, and a unifying new vision for the combined entity. 2. Systems and technology, the digital spine. The two banks ran on completely different core banking software and IT architectures. Migrating millions of customer accounts, transaction histories, and products from one system to another without a hitch was a nightmare scenario. A single major failure could lead to a loss of customer confidence and a bank run. The team executed a reverse integration, migrating all of Meridian's accounts onto HarborOne Bank's more robust IT platform. This required military-style planning, executed over weekends and public holidays, with thousands of staff on high alert. 3. Branch and brand rationalization. There were branches of the two banks literally across the street from each other in many cities. A nationwide branch optimization program was launched, merging locations, rebranding all outlets to the HarborOne Bank name, with its distinctive red and white A logo, and creating a seamless physical network. The iconic Meridian Bank blue and gold began to disappear from the landscape, a visual symbol of the changing of the guard. 4. Talent and morale. With over 12,000 employees combined, there was immense anxiety about job losses. HarborOne leadership had to be transparent about the rationalization process while identifying and retaining the best talent from both institutions. The process was painful but necessary for efficiency. 5. Customer retention. Millions of Meridian customers were confused and anxious. Would their accounts be safe? Would their loans be called in? HarborOne launched a massive communication campaign through advertisements, branch meetings, and community engagements to reassure customers. The message was consistent. This is a union of strength. You now have a stronger, more secure bank. The integration period, spanning 2011 to 2013, was a time of intense pressure, long hours, and significant short-term costs that weighed on HarborOne Bank's earnings. Critics wondered if they had bitten off more than they could chew. But Nosa and Wagbara remained unshakably focused. They had planned for this pain. It was the price of the prize. By 2014, the dust began to settle, and the fruits of the gamble became undeniable. The merger was not just a rescue, it was a spectacular success that redefined the Nigerian banking sector. 1. Scale and dominance. Overnight, HarborOne Bank was transformed. It became one of Nigeria's top 3 banks by every key metric: total assets, customer base, over 7 million, deposit base, and branch network. It had achieved in one transaction what would have taken 2 decades of organic growth. 2. A fortress balance sheet. The acquisition brought a massive, low-cost deposit base from Meridian's strong retail presence. This provided stable, cheap funding that empowered HarborOne to lend more aggressively and competitively. The cleanup by AMCON had given them a healthy starting point. 3. Unrivaled distribution. The combined network created probably the most extensive distribution footprint in Nigeria, reaching every corner of the country. This was invaluable for retail banking, SME lending, and driving financial inclusion. 4. The platform for continental ambition. With domestic dominance secured, HarborOne Bank could now look outward. The scale and financial heft from the merger fueled its ambitious Pan-African expansion strategy. It began acquiring and building operations across Africa, from Ghana to Kenya, from Zambia to Rwanda, transforming into the multinational giant it is today. 5. A model of corporate transformation. The story became a Harvard Business School case study. It was a masterclass in how a well-managed, visionary institution can leverage a systemic crisis for transformative growth. It showcased the importance of strategic preparation, the earlier small mergers, regulatory savvy, and flawless execution. The HarborOne Meridian story is more than a corporate acquisition. It is a pivotal chapter in the history of Nigerian finance. It symbolized the end of an era of brash, undisciplined banking and the dawn of a new age defined by governance, risk management, and strategic execution. For Meridian, it was an elegant exit from a self-inflicted catastrophe. Its legacy, the branches, the customers, the brand's former reach, was preserved and revitalized within a stronger institution. For HarborOne Bank, it was the definitive gamble that paid off. Ehimanosa retired in 2013, having seen his vision realized. Donald Wagbara steered the consolidated behemoth to even greater heights before his tragic passing in 2024. They had, true to their word, built a platform respected across Africa and the world. The takeover also validated the CBN's controversial 2009 intervention. The bridge bank model, pioneered in this deal, proved to be an effective tool for resolving systemic bank failures without taxpayer loss or depositor panic. It showed that with clever structuring and the right partner, even the most distressed institutions could be saved to fight another day. In the end, the story is a testament to the power of strategic vision, prepared minds, and the courage to seize a defining moment. HarborOne Bank didn't just take over Meridian Bank, it absorbed its strength, purged its weakness, and in doing so, forged itself into a colossus. The red A flag flying over the former blue and gold towers stands as a permanent monument to one of the most audacious and successful corporate conquests in African business history.